What's up, guys? It's John, and today I'm here at Prince Law Offices in rural PA, and I've got my buddy Josh Prince with me. Now, Josh is an attorney here in PA, and why don't you tell these guys what kind of makes you special in this particular industry?
All I do is concentrate my practice on the firearms industry. I represent both individuals and federal firearms licensees at the state and federal level. Basically representing individuals with any types of state law issues such as PICS denials, forming gun trusts, any issues that they may encounter. We also do a fair amount of representation of local gun ranges, gun clubs, also deal with EPA issues for lead at indoor ranges and that. So pretty much run the entire gambit of state law issues. And then federally, I represent federal firearms licensees or gun dealers across the United States with any issues relating to ATF or other administrative federal agencies.
Okay. And guys, that's why we're here today, is because Josh has expertise in the National Firearms Act, or the NFA. Josh, why don't you take a minute and explain exactly kind of where it came from, what it is, that kind of thing for my viewers.
Okay. The National Firearms Act actually started back in 1934. That's when it was enacted. And since then, we've had a couple acts that have basically modified the original National Firearms Act, those being the Gun Control Act in 1968, the Firearm Owners Protection Act in 1986.
Okay.
And basically, the precipitous to the 1934 National Firearms Act was issues with Al Capone. And basically, the sale of alcohol under a Prohibition era, where those mobsters, I guess we shall call them, were utilizing NFA weapons, although it's questionable how many were actually used in crimes. So at that point in time, the Congress sought to enact a tax to basically preclude people from being able to purchase these weapons. Back in the day, the tax was the same. It was $200. And that amount was actually determined based on the price of a brand new Thompson machine gun.
Really?
It was actually, I believe, if memory serves, about $146 for a brand new Thompson. Wow. So they wanted a 100+% tax and figured that individuals just wouldn't pay the tax. Luckily for us, although the dollar has changed over the years, the tax has not. So anymore, that tax is slight in comparison to the costs of machine guns. It's not so slight when you look at it in comparison to prices of any other weapons or suppressors and some short-barreled rifles and that. However, it's still a lot better than what it originally was.
Okay. Now, just so my viewers understand, the National Firearms Act is essentially just a way to regulate machine guns, suppressors, short-barreled rifles, short-barreled shotguns, and what they call any other weapon.
There's one other. There's also destructive
devices, excuse me. And essentially what that'll do is slow down the process for you to get your hands on something fun. You know, that's the long and short of it. And there are a couple ways for people to get a hold of these items. Is that correct?
Yeah, actually in the regulations it defines what a person is.
Okay.
And it can be a natural person like you or I. It can also be a corporation, an estate, a partnership, a trust. There's a couple different entities for purposes of owning NFA weapons of what constitutes a person.
Okay. For being concise, today we'll kind of just talk about the things that most people deal with, which is either an individual, you know, like a natural person, or a trust, because that's something that you guys specialize in here, right?
Absolutely. We do a lot of gun trusts for our clients. We can also do LLCs and corporations, but I'm sure as we'll get into, generally I don't feel that they provide as much benefit for the client, and there's more upkeep with them.
Okay.
I think the trust is the perfect entity. It's kind of a set it and forget it entity, which is why I recommend it.
Now, why don't you give a brief explanation as to how the process works in general, let's say with something as basic as a suppressor or a short-barreled rifle?
Okay, well, generally there's two ways in which you could end up the owner of an NFA weapon. Either you can make it, which would be on an ATF Form 1, or you can transfer an existing one that was already made by someone else or some other entity. The difference being that when you Form 1 something to make it yourself, you are considered a maker and have to engrave your name, city, and state on that item. It has to be engraved to .003 depth and has to be at least a 1/16 of an inch high. And that's all in the regulations in that. But a good example of where you may want to make a weapon would be if you have your regular Title I AR-15. And Title I refers to the Gun Control Act. And those are your regular rifles, shotguns, handguns, whereas Title II under the Gun Control Act are all those National Firearms Act weapons, those NFA weapons. So if you have your regular Title I gun, your AR-15 that you bought off the shelves at the store, and you now want to make it a short-barreled rifle, you would submit a Form 1 to ATF requesting permission to be able to make that item. And once you get back the approval, you would then have the gun engraved. You would then go out and purchase your barrel or have your barrel cut down. The AR-15 platform's perfect because you can just slap a whole new upper right on it.
Very, very simple to do.
Absolutely. And once it's engraved and you purchased your short-barreled upper, you'd slap it on and you're good to go. Now, I think it's important to note in that situation that you should not purchase that short-barreled upper until you have the approval from ATF. I know there's some people who say, oh, I have a perfect opportunity for a great deal. If that's the case, you can pay for it. You can let the dealer keep it or whoever has it hold on to it, but you do not take possession of it until the ATF approves your Form 1.
And now that would lead to what's called constructive intent, is that correct?
Constructive possession,
yep. Okay.
Where basically you have the ability to make an illegal weapon because prior to the ATF approving your Form 1, you have no right to make that short-barreled weapon.
Okay.
Now, the other way in which you can end up with an NFA weapon is probably more common, and that is simply where you're transferring an existing weapon. So you're purchasing direct from Colt a short-barreled AR-15. The dealer will generally receive it in or have it in inventory, and then you'll be basically filling out a Form 4, which is to transfer it from that dealer to yourself.
Right. Very simple.
Right. And that's nice also because you don't have to engrave anything on the weapon because you're only transferring it. You're not making it. Colt, when they made it, if you use that as the example, had to engrave its name already on it. And the engraving's only required for makers.
And I think that's important to note because if you ever decide to sell whatever item that you decide to purchase, then it makes it a little bit easier when your information is not etched on the side of, or the side or the bottom, anywhere on that particular item. That's a nice thing to have.
Absolutely, and that's also another reason sometimes people want to use trusts is because here in PA at least, we can pretty much name our trust anything we want. So if they're planning on doing short-barreled rifles or any other making, they can pretty much choose the name that will end up being engraved. It's not their own first and last individual name being placed on the firearm.
So that makes it a little bit easier if you decide to sell, that kind of thing.
That's correct.
So just a basic overview of the purchase process is essentially you go into a shop. If they have it, you can just pay for it there. They then give you some paperwork to fill out. Now, you can go the individual route and get law enforcement sign-off, a passport photo, fingerprints, and along with your $200 check. You send that off to the ATF, wait a long time. Right now, it's about 8 months. That's what we're seeing.
For individuals, I'm seeing 8 to 9 months. For trusts, I'm seeing about 6 months.
So you are seeing a difference with trusts.
Yeah. Again, I don't have that many clients that are doing the individual route. Usually where I'm seeing that information is posted online by people who've gone the individual route. And I get feedback from my clients. Now, we're hoping that period's going to drop down. In the past, we were seeing between 30 and 45 days for trusts and between 90 and 120 days for individuals.
Oh, man, those days are gone for a little while here.
It may be a little while, but they have hired 9 more examiners.
Okay.
So they have actually doubled their capacity. Now, those examiners need time to learn the law and how to process the forms. But I believe that we will see those time periods come back down to time when the NFA branch originally moved to Virginia, and we saw.
So you think it's going to become a more reasonable time frame?
I'm hoping, although some of the changes that have caused the backlog are states that previously did not allow certain types of NFA weapons. So there were some states where you couldn't purchase suppressors.
Mm-hmm.
And in the past year and a half, those states have changed their laws to where you can now purchase suppressors.
Right.
There was one state, I think it was Washington State,
Okay.
that actually said you could own a suppressor, you couldn't use it. And people would actually have to go across the state lines if they wanted to use it. They've changed their law to where now people can use it,
Okay.
so now the benefit is more and more people started purchasing them. Additionally, we have a lot more manufacturers out in the marketplace.
Yeah, the marketplace as a whole has just exploded.
Absolutely.
You know, the last couple months here in the U.S. have led to never before seen volumes of sales, and that includes NFA items.
And I'm going to forget the specific date. I think it was in December of 2012.
That's correct.
The NFA branch had its first $1 million plus revenue month.
Mm-hmm.
And they are actually thinking that they may see $1.5 million revenue month in the past month in May.
Really?
We're waiting to see what's going to all come out. I don't think they have the statistics ready for it yet.
Mm-hmm.
But basically, they were figuring on people receiving back their refunds. And they have a month, and I believe it's May, that typically they see a surge
Right.
in applications because of people receiving their tax refunds.
Wow. It's very interesting to me to see that previously they had only had 9 examiners for the entire U.S. To handle that workload. It's kind of sad, honestly, that we're kind of being neglected in that matter. But you said they're now doubled, and they had some assistance. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. Basically, the ATF is under the Department of Justice, which is under a hiring freeze.
Okay.
In order for them to hire new examiners, even while they were actually losing existing examiners, they needed permission from the DOJ
Wow.
to hire. So I believe it took about 2 to 3 years to process their request, and it was granted. They were able to hire 9 more examiners. I'm not sure if all 9 have been hired as of right now,
Okay.
but clearly it's going to take some time to train them. The other thing that they had done during the hiring freeze was they actually were allowed to hire temporary assistants.
Okay.
And what those assistants were hired to do was look at the forms in advance that were sitting there those months before the examiner even got to look at them, and basically review them for any errors. If there were errors, the administrative assistant would kick them back to the individual or the entity, asking for the corrections to be made so that when the examiner was ready, those forms were pretty much streamlined. There weren't going to be any errors, no need to kick back, and the examiner could just simply approve them.
Right. So the people that managed to take this simple process and screw it up got kicked back. The people that did it correctly got streamlined, and that kind of made it a little bit faster for them.
That's right. And the other thing people have to realize, it's not just individuals that are applying to ATF and needing forms approved.
Mm-hmm.
Manufacturers have to submit forms to ATF every time they manufacture a new NFA weapon. Additionally, anytime a special occupation taxpayer, which is a federal firearms licensee or a gun dealer,
right, SOT,
that has paid their special occupation tax, wants to transfer to another dealer, that's a form. That's a Form 3.
Yep.
That has to be processed. Now, I can tell you that the National Firearms Act branch of ATF does give deference to FFLs. So those forms are processed a lot faster, but you also have to realize that those entities are ones which hold federal firearms licensees, so they've already been vetted by ATF not to be criminals, not to be prohibited persons. So that's, in part, how they can streamline it. Additionally, the other thing that ATF has announced is that we are going to be going to electronic forms.
which is amazing.
I believe that's going to really help with the inaccuracies of the National Firearms Registration and Transfer Record, the NFRTR, which is the database ATF keeps. Because right now what happens is the individual submits that form, and then you have another individual typing that information back into the computer system. So if they mistype it, they may never be able to find that registry.
Right.
So if we can do it electronically, where it'll automatically populate the fields of the NFRTR, I think there's a lot less likelihood of errors resulting from the input of that data. Unfortunately, if people go the individual route, they're not going to be able to submit electronic Form 4s because there's no way to submit an electronic fingerprint card or photographs or things like that. So it'll really be limited to trusts and other entities like trusts.
Wow, that's going to be amazing if and when we get to that point. Now, you know, it's 2013. It's kind of shocking that we haven't yet, but I think that will be incredible when it does happen.
Well, it's shocking how many errors exist in the NFRTR. The database is so corrupt. It's really unfortunate. There actually was a video by then acting NFA branch chief Busey, B-U-S-E-Y, where it was a training roll call video.
Okay.
And I believe it's still up on our blog, where he went and told a whole bunch of recruits that basically we will always testify in a court of law that the NFRTR is 100% accurate. We know that may not be the case, but
Wow.
that's what we will always testify to.
Wow.
And some audits by the Government Accountability Office has shown it could be as bad as a 50% error rate.
Wow. That's staggering.
Absolutely. And I wrote, while I was in law school, I think it was about a 112-page law review article on the inaccuracies of the National Firearms Registration and Transfer Record and it violating due process.
Right.
It wasn't published. I think at that point in time, everyone was a little concerned about putting it out there. But what's interesting is after that, there is a statistician Fritz Schuren, who testified in a criminal proceeding that the NFRTR is insufficient for a criminal prosecution.
Wow.
And that really shook up the government because Fritz Schuren is the leading statistician in the United States.
Wow.
He is who a president would call if there was an issue.
And this guy says this thing is completely useless and inaccurate.
Correct.
Wow. In a court of law, at least.
Yes, absolutely. And he was speaking in a criminal context where there is a heightened standard compared to a civil. But even so, I think he would have testified the same in a civil proceeding.
Wow. That's amazing.
And that really brings us to a good issue. This is why I tell all my clients, if you get your form approved, you should keep multiple redundant copies in multiple redundant locations. Mm-hmm. Scan them in. Cloud storage anymore is real cheap. You can keep it off-site if, God forbid, you have a fire or anything else. Have copies all over, especially if, God forbid, ATF comes after you or local law enforcement comes after you and tries to prosecute you. They take your computers, take all your files. You have no ability to defend yourself,
right? Because
they have everything. If you have this information out there in other locations where you or your defense attorney can access it, you're going to be in a lot better shape.
I agree. And that kind of applies across the board with all kinds of important documents, honestly.
Absolutely. I mean, I handle a lot of issues with federal firearms licensees, and it's amazing when ATF goes in and does a compliance inspection and then issues a warning letter or wants to have a warning hearing or a revocation proceeding. When I ask ATF for its records on that FFL, it's amazing how they lose records that are beneficial to my clients. I mean, it's just you know, a mind-boggling wonder of the world. So that's why I've started telling all my FFLs, you send me any documents you send in the ATF, you send me a copy, I keep a copy here on site. And in cloud, so that no matter what, I don't care what ATF has, I have everything I need.
Yeah, that's fantastic.